So thank you very much for coming. We're looking forward to a great program. And to open, I'd like to welcome Dave Temkin, Principal Network Architect of Netflix, who's going to tell us about the real cost of IXPs.
All right, just to open, that is not my new, very old job. I'm actually Vice President of Global Networks for Netflix. I don't need applause for that, I just thought I should correct it. That is how I started the CDN at Netflix, however. So I'm here today to talk to everyone about IXPs. And you'll notice that there's no peering track on the agenda this time around. I'm not on the program committee. My understanding is that the program committee decided that they wanted to integrate some of the peering content into the general session. I'm hopefully part of that. But on top of that, they wanted to make sure that whatever we were putting in that track is fresh, and I guess they just didn't feel that there was enough content to put in a track. Anyway, this talk, I'm here to have a discussion. I do want people to get up and ask questions. I'll even accept thinly veiled comments in the form of questions. But what I am asking for is that you respect me, you respect the other people in the room, you respect the companies we're going to talk about. I'll be a little honest, I'm personally a little rattled from the events over the weekend, and so I'm probably not the same normal jovial self that you all know that I, of course, am. But I'll try to hold this together, and we'll see where we can go. So, IXPs. We know they're awesome, right? We know there's a lot of them. There's 771 active, or 454 actives, 771 listed. Some of those are probably aspirational. Some of those are defunct, whatever they might be. You're not here for a history lesson. We can talk about this offline if you really want to know more about the history of IXPs. But what I do want to make sure is that everyone knows that I did gather as much data as I could from publicly available sources. So I read the marketing glossies from every IXP. Some of them are pretty boring. Some of them are pretty entertaining. There's a lot of info and a lot of fluff. I read the annual reports of IXPs that do annual reports. I read the budgets of IXPs that produce them. I looked at all the price lists historically. I looked at 10Ks for companies that do 10Ks. Spent hours with archive.org because that is one of the best sources. There's no one really who maintains a historical list of IXP pricing. Job Snijders is working on something similar to that now, and I linked to that out of my presentation, so if you want to get that later on. Excuse me. I should have grabbed water before I started. But I can't guarantee that it's 100% accurate because not all of this data is publicly available. What I can do is tell you that I frame anything that I guess or infer as just that. So I'm not going to state things as fact that aren't. So we look at the 4 IXPs that I used as my source here. In order, you can see where it was easy to find info versus hard to find info. I spoke with the board members of various IXPs. I spoke with current board members. I spoke with ex-board members. To be completely honest, some of them stopped talking to me after they found out what I was doing this for. I can probably tell you why. I'm sure you can figure it out on your own, though. And I actually found that to be super interesting because in some ways what I saw were ad hominem attacks on me for going even daring to ask questions about this. But I also saw the other side of it, which were people who were genuinely interested in getting this information out there. So I was speaking with Lynx. Lynx, I had given this presentation, a smaller version of this presentation at GPF in, where were we, San Diego? No, Los Angeles, sorry, a few months ago. And Lynx board member got up and corrected me and said, this piece of data is wrong. That board member was correct. I had actually undershot on the pricing. Lynx sent me their historical pricing for the last 5 years, and I revised this presentation upwards based on that. We then got into a discussion about how they felt other pieces of the presentation might not be correct. And I said, great, send me the detailed budget. Let me look at this and let me understand. And I will gladly change my presentation if that's the case. This is the quote that I got back. So for various reasons, such as not allowing our CapEx budget to get exposed to vendors and weaken our negotiating position, this is not a line item summary. Whether or not I could have gotten a more detailed version under NDA, I don't know. But that's not the point, because I can't get up here and present to you data that I received under NDA. So another question is, when we talk about money, what are we going to denominate this in, right? Exchange rates fluctuate pretty regularly. You know, the dollar versus the pound versus the euro has changed a lot over the last few years, over the last decade especially. The currency conversion rates are current. They're as of when this presentation was put together. The reality is, if you're a company, and this presentation is framed as a presentation given by a company in the US trying to decide, do I want to go peer in Europe, I'm stuck with the currency conversion rate. I'm not a bank. I can't, I don't get any benefits that someone else doesn't get. So this is reality. This is cash flow out of pocket. So I have another quote that I'd like to ask a fill-in Brit to give for me. Oh. No? All right.
One. We need to figure out how to regulate ourselves before a much more unsavory group of people comes in and does it for us.
Thank you, Martin. I also don't often quote Richard Turkbergen, but
if IXs want to funnel their profits into drinking and social events rather than reducing price, and that's certainly their option. In fact, one might even call it a smart use of the funds, given a rational assessment of their primary customer base. A bunch of small networks who don't and will probably never realize the economics appearing have long since passed them by. But in the face of lack of competition and demand to do better, these guys are just doing what any rational business would do, make their costs more efficient over time and pocket or drink the profits. And there will probably always be a couple of hundred networks out there who are willing to keep funding the drinking and social events, so it's not even a failing business model.
Thank you, Richard. So let's talk a little bit about the IXP corporation types. There are nonprofits. You'll notice I said the minority. When we're talking about IXP corporation types, they're not just pure nonprofit. They're certainly not 501c3s. Some of them could certainly be 501c6s. None of them are 501c12s, which we'll get to in a moment. There are for-profit ones, and in some cases, you have a nonprofit owned by a for-profit, where there is one share issued of the nonprofit, which is owned by the for-profit. And if anyone who works for one of these organizations would like to get up and explain why that's done, the floor is yours. So, if we think about what defines profit, right? Lynx made $2.32 million in profit last year. Board members for Lynx are compensated. They are paid. I would love to be paid for my service to the NANOG board. I'm not. I do this as volunteer work. Sure, my company pays for me to be here, and that's great, but companies also pay for them to be in the Lynx board. $22,000 per year, I think it's 15,000 British pounds. I think it's a pretty good hourly rate for board meetings. The chair is compensated $44,000, but that's actually a professional full-time job. AM6, if you remove depreciation from the budget, which is a fun little accounting thing that all of us have to deal with, anyone here who runs a network knows what depreciation is, turned $4.1 million in cash in 2015. But once you add depreciation in, it actually looks like negative cash flow. So, when we talk about, again, the models of these IXPs and what people think they are and what they actually are, the member model, what is it, right? I'm a member, my company is a member of Lynx. Many of you in the room are. Many of you are members of AM6 and other IXPs that consider themselves membership-based IXPs. They're not, when you vote for something, that vote is non-binding. At the end of the day, even the board is an advisory board. It's a professionally managed company that can choose to do things or not. They can choose to adjust pricing whether or not their members give them permission to do so. So at the end of the day, that is not a member-run organization. It is in the same way that we elect people to, represent us here in the States to the government. They get to choose what the tax rate is. Just because I pay taxes doesn't mean that I get to choose what that tax rate is. In some cases, as I mentioned here, the board itself is non-binding. It's an advisor to the corporation. And some of that is covered in bylaws, some of that is just informal, some of that is formal. I would ask at that point, is membership better? Do we really think that having this as such a soft kind of engagement where you make a vote, board doesn't necessarily have to honor that vote, is that really what we think we're getting? So when we think member, though, are we really thinking 501c12s in the States here, right? A co-op. Are we thinking, hey, if I am giving you money, you are using that money to provide me a service. And that service in this case would be interconnection. I give you money, you give me a switch port, I can put traffic on that switch port, everyone is happy. If I give you too much money, you can either directly reinvest that in giving me a better switch port, or you can give me that money back at the end of the year. And if you look at the IRS definition here, it's pretty straightforward, right? They collect 85% of their income from members for the sole purpose of meeting losses and expenses of operating that co-op. This is how many utilities work. This is how telephone companies work. There are whole statewide telephone company co-ops. There are lots and lots of electrical co-ops. This is how utilities are delivered in many cases, both here and abroad. So let's not argue about whether transit peering is better than peering, because obviously transit is the better deal here, and let's talk about why. So I'm going to frame this slide and say that NetNode did reduce their prices. They reduced their prices a couple of weeks after the first time I got up and gave this presentation. Whether you want to call it cause or effect, or you want to call it a happy coincidence, I don't really care. I'm not going to pat myself on the back. I'm going to say that it was a pretty small price decrease from NetNode. But aside from what they did literally a few weeks ago, they haven't reduced their pricing in 5 years. And so you're just kind of stuck with that. But if you look at the other IXPs, it's kind of in the middle there, right? Transit, if you use telegeography's pricing, has gone down 80% over the last 5 years. DKIX, private corporation, doesn't hold itself out to be nonprofit. Sizable reduction. AMSIX looks pretty good too over the last 5 years. Link's right in line with DKIX. If you look, at NetNode 5 years ago, certainly was was almost cheap, arguably, but now is ridiculously expensive. So, as I mentioned, I frame this talk as I'm a US company and I'm buying transit or peering or whatever it might be to deliver my service in Europe. If you look at 5 years ago, telegeography says you were paying $5 a meg. If you look at now, ish, they say you're paying just below $1 a meg. I think we can all agree that telegeography's pricing at scale is usually pretty inflated, and so I think most of us in the room would say that this is probably on the high side, but percentage-wise, it's pretty accurate. If you look at peering around Europe, the dollar amounts look pretty good. If you think about the fact that if you're looking at just on a pure traffic delivery perspective, you start at a little below $1, and you level out at about 20 cents, and it's not too bad. You're talking about a 30-cent average across these major IXPs. So what you do have to remember, though, is even though you're paying 30 cents a meg, you don't get the benefit of just dropping that traffic, on one port somewhere in London and getting to everywhere around the world. I now have to go deploy infrastructure at 5, 6, 7 different IXPs around the world, and now I'm in a position where that 30 cents has now ballooned. They've added in my colo cost and everything else, and the manpower and the equipment involved in deploying that. And I'm not going to try to make up a model for that because every network's different. But the reality is if we just look at it on a percentage basis, it is way too high. So if we look at the trends transit has continued to outpace IXP ports for the last 5 years, right? I think it's pretty obvious here. You see that curve, you see the major correction between 2012 and 2013, and you see a more gradual curve from 2013 on, but you're not really seeing, none of those lines really track the transit line, right? Which is what we stand here and compare. And we can talk about quality of transit versus peering. That's a whole, we could spend another 45-minute presentation arguing about that, and I think we've done that enough times already in this forum. So why? How did we get here? Is it the underlying cost? Is it that the hardware is just ridiculously expensive and there's just no way that there's any way that we could reduce the underlying cost of these services? No, right? If you look at a switch capable of operating an IXP, you have 90-some% reduction over the last 5 years for that 10 gig port. You look at the cost of transit, that's actually tracked it way closer, right? You have almost an 80% reduction. But the 3 IXPs are nowhere even close to that. If you also look at revenue versus investment, so again, coming back to the hardware argument, if you look at revenue, revenue continues to grow. This is from AM6's annual report. You see that up and to the right. Everyone here who likes looking at graphs of things, whatever those might be, generally up and to the right is good and down is bad. But if you look at investment, the investment is pretty lumpy there, right? You go up, increasing investment with revenue into 2013 and 2014, you see that huge jump, and then 2015 next to nothing, yet all we get out of that is a 5% price reduction for 2017. So I asked the question at GPF, why wouldn't IXPs start looking at white box hardware, things cheaper, or we just want a dumb switch for the most part in the middle of an IXP? You talk to Fortune 100 companies. I talked to a Fortune 5 company, and they said they're spending more money on white box hardware this year than they will spend with one of the 2 major network vendors, which is a complete opposite of what it would have been 5 years ago. Why can't IXPs do this? Footnote to that, I actually got reached out to by 2 different vendors saying that IXPs have started looking at this, but this is, again, only in the last few weeks, which I'm glad to hear. Many of the large IXPs run on large successful IXPs run on inexpensive switching platforms. How many people in the room are a member of the 6 in Seattle? One of the best IXPs in the world, right? I think you can all agree that it's reliable, it's as cheap as it can get, and it's scaled quite well as traffic has grown in that region, and they're running on Arista, right? I think so, but IXPs, you're still seeing them go put lots and lots and lots of money into big expensive routers when really they could run just fine on switches, and we'll talk about the feature set that's needed to do that in a second, but not needed. And when I asked the question at GPF, it was very much so the answer came back as sunk cost fallacy, right? Oh, well, we've invested all of this time and all of this engineering into how to make this awesome Brocade or Juniper or whatever platform work. We could never possibly undo that investment. Why would we walk away from that? That's ridiculous. Again, happy to talk about that. I think that the failure to innovate here, that channeling money towards marketing and not towards engineering is one of the problems here. And an over-engineered product suite, i.e. we're just asking for a layer 2 fabric, why are we not just getting a layer 2 fabric, is to blame here. I would take certainly a 50% price cut to get that reduction in services just to go back to what is a good old peering switch, and I'm sure most of the other people in this room would agree with the same. So, oops, there we go. If we look at the correlation, right, so of Ethernet switching cost against, again, IXP pricing, there was only 1 year where you even see any kind of correlation between, hey, these ports got cheaper for us to add and the port pricing got cheaper. Aside from that, you see some, pretty big nosedives there. You see not really a lot of changes based on the underlying infrastructure. And when you think about what an IXP is basically just underlying infrastructure. So no real answer on that one either. You would think, though, that adding scale would get our pricing down, right? We would see great advantages to, again, those of you who have been to the peering track remember when the IXPs used to love to get up and say, hey, Up and to the right, look at this awesome graph. If you've never seen Nick Hillier's presentation that is just all about up and to the right, I highly suggest you watch it because it will sum every IXP's presentation for the last decade, which is basically, hey, traffic continues to grow, we're awesome. And great, traffic does continue to grow and IXPs are awesome. But why are we not getting any actual scale advantage from that? Where is that advantage being accrued? Because it doesn't seem like it's being accrued by the members. If they're not decreasing, right, if we think about a customer of scale, someone who's got 10 ports, 20 ports, 30 ports, why are they not seeing, why are we not publishing pricing that gets you better price, gets you a better deal if you buy 10, 20, 30, however many ports it might be? The only people who really see any benefit are, certain IXPs give away 1 gig ports to small customers. But the guys who are sustaining this, who are growing these IXPs, are not seeing any advantage. The one dirty little secret that I'll tell you that is the used car dealer analogy they don't want you to know is that most of the pricing with IXPs is negotiable. At the end of the day, they're not, the members don't have to vote on what the pricing is. And so you certainly can get yourself better pricing if you want it, but that's not well known. So let's talk about why I think, this is my hypothesis, why we haven't seen any real innovation in this space. So first of all, technology, we just talked about that. With extended, extended scale comes extended staff. So we've got support staff supporting these, extended marketing and international expansion. So if we talk about equipment again, if you look at some giant Brocade box, now neatly fits in that like little Cisco box, right? Quarter of the power, quarter of the space, quarter of the price, way better density. I really would like to focus on quarter of the price in this case. Mr. Hargrave. Or Mr. Levy or Mr. Hargrave, who are you right now?
Is the mic on? Hello. Will Hargrave from Lonap. I'm not Martin. I noticed you've only got 1 box here. I noticed you said 1 switch, 1 device. The thing is even a mid-size IXP like Lonap has tens of boxes.
Agreed.
We spend a lot of money on these are in multiple sites. Part of our mission is to keep data center operators honest by operating in multiple data centers. And all of that inter-site infrastructure costs a lot of money.
Yep.
But in return for that, you guys get much better pricing on racks, cross-connects, power. So I think that's the point I want to make. This inter-site infrastructure costs a lot of money.
I'm not sure that I follow the latter point on that, but I understand I think the meta point, which is, I agree. I'm simplifying this. We could talk about, the 6 has a few extensions, right? They've got 3 or 4 switches around the Seattle area. Lonap has a dozen switches, right? Lynx has probably 24 switches. Certainly, there is scale that comes along with that.
Amsix has hundreds of dark fibers all around Amsterdam just to run his infrastructure on.
Absolutely, and I think we're in total agreement. But the argument that I make from that is that as that grows, in the same way that I go out and buy dark fiber, the more dark fiber I buy, the cheaper it gets.
I wish that was the case in London, but thanks.
Well, London's dark fiber is already pretty darn cheap. They get you coming and going. That's also the same thing flying into Heathrow. So, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I do respectfully disagree that IXPs is part. I'm sorry?
Identify yourself,
please.
please.
Dan Golding with Google. I respectfully disagree that IXPs have part of their role in distributing their infrastructure to somehow keep data center providers honest.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that means, and it certainly doesn't control prices. In fact, all it does is make it easier to reach customers, which is great, which is wonderful, but there's no check on, data center pricing or power or anything like that. It's immaterial.
All right, I'll let Mr. Hargrave answer that, because I think that was the point that I struggled to follow as well.
Yeah.
Well, the key thing is, you remember when Netflix built to London, when you first launched in the UK, and actually we had a conversation. I said, you can go to this data center operator, this one, but whichever one you go to, you can still reach a good selection of IXPs and a good selection of private peers. If that were not the case, then you would have had to build into the one choice.
Sure.
And that's the point I'm making here.
Okay. Now, I agree with you. I would say that we could all agree that the fact that we have IXPs in various markets that allow you can get to that IXP from multiple different data centers. You know, just for full disclosure, I'm the chair of the board for Community IX, which has FLIX in Florida. The reason why we're successful is because we're in 3 different major co-location facilities. If we were just in one, well, arguably, given the market that exists there, we probably still would be successful just based on the pricing structure. But regardless of that, I agree. That is absolutely a must-have. When people go to move into a data center, they are looking usually for, hey, if the major IXP in this market is Lynx or LoNapp, I want to make sure that they're in this data center. Absolutely important. And that does create a burden on both the data center and the IXP. And I think we could talk about the fact that there are many data centers that have given away space and power and infrastructure to IXPs because they realize in order to get people in the door, they do that. And so that discussion cuts both ways. So let's move on. We can certainly bring that back up in Q&A at the end if we have time. So next hypothesis, headcount. So I really wanted to use like level 3's headcount for this, but level 3, you know, they bought Global Crossing, they bought some other small companies, they laid a bunch of people off, yada, yada, yada. Those of you who know the executive management at Cogent know that they're frugal. And so you know that they'll hire when they need to hire people, and you know, they've got a very talented staff, but it's a lean staff. I thought that that would be a really interesting counterpoint to IXP staffing and just the general trends, which is that Cogent, which operates a network in dozens of countries at this point, has continued to add headcount, right? They're at almost 10x or more than 10x, sorry, what the largest IXP is. But they've really grown pretty much on the same pattern as the other IXPs. Unfortunately, this data was incomplete. It was hard to find data before 2013 on what any of the IXPs other than NetNode looked like, or sorry, AM6 looked like. But you can see it's pretty much the same trend. But Cogent has added countries and metros and has fiber all over the world and so on and so forth. Most of these IXPs have 10, 20, 30 switches in a metro, and that's it. And at most, they've added a couple data centers here and there. And if you have to add one staff every time, one headcount every time you add a data center, you're really not taking advantage of the scale that you should be. If I had to add staff every time we opened up a new POP, my team would be, numbering in the hundreds at this point. So let's talk a little bit about marketing. You paid, on average, about $450 to sit here and watch me speak. I personally consider that a bargain. I accept free drinks afterwards if you'd like to make up the difference. I didn't show you any cat pictures, so I think I hopefully get a little bit of kudos for that. There's almost 1,000 people here, actually roughly 900, so 450,000 or so given high and low watermark and registrations. Total event budget's about $400,000. So there's $50,000 in profit just from registrations, give or take. Then you add in all the sponsorships on top of that. All of that money just goes, we have two places that money goes. One is into our newly passed reserve policy, which if you're a member, you'll hear about again tomorrow morning at the members' breakfast. But we also take that money and we put it into education, which you'll hear about next. Put it into outreach, you'll also hear about that. Staff salaries, we have a very lean staff, right? Staff travel, we're not going anywhere all that exciting. And as I mentioned, the reserve for what will be the inevitable downturn. Microsoft buying LinkedIn today for $26.2 billion. We're placing bets as to whether that is the sign of the start of this, or if that is the sign that this is just going to keep going. I'm hoping it's the latter. But if you look at what these organizations are doing with their money, they're going to these events, right? And this is certainly not an exhaustive list, just an exhausting list if you're on the marketing staff of some of these organizations. I actually saw a couple of new ones that I was going to add to this slide and decided that this was representative enough. But you're paying for staff at these things, you're paying for sponsorships, you're paying to get your logo on things. It's a non-trivial amount of money. And so, oops. If you look at what the focus of these organizations are, they're just, some of them are just like NANOG, right? Some of those events are like NANOG. It makes sense for someone to show up and give some money and help out that community. But there are way, less altruistic reasons than that. If you talk about commercial meeting operators, ITW, that's not NANOG. It is a multi-million, if not billion-dollar event at this point if you look at the amount of commerce that is funneled through that event. You have marketing. You have paid award ceremonies. If none of you are familiar with this, next time someone gets an awesome award, look at and find out how to get nominated for that award and see where you send the check. And then you have galas and social events. I did not get to go to RIPE. That looked awesome. But if I look at that and I think about that second bar there as far as what NetNode has done over the last 5 years, come on, really? So this is where we're at. We're at a point where prices haven't been reduced in 5 years, yet this dance routine looked phenomenal. So this is, all right, Mr. Mach.
Hi, Dave. Jared Mach from NTT. Wow, there's an echo in here. The NetNod dinner was excellent, but you also had to pay to go to it. It wasn't free.
It doesn't cover itself.
It doesn't cover itself, and nor do a lot of the events here that you come to enjoy, like beer and gear and the other things that you have to go and solicit sponsors for these types of events.
Yep.
So I'm not defending NetNod, but I'm saying it definitely was an excellent dinner, and you should have been there.
I will remember that for next time. No, you're absolutely right. So that was the point of the slide regarding NANOG's finances. Things like beer and gear are paid for through sponsorships, right? We can't cover the cost of the meeting just based purely on registration. And most of the sponsors who show up there show up because they know they get to sell to a room of awesome people who have the ability to buy things. And so that's why they're here. But we've made a huge effort to keep that out of the room, in the same way that the socials at NANOG are also sponsored by people. But you know what? I would much rather see, thanks to our host EdgeConnects, a for-profit company that can make decisions about how they want to allocate their money and decide that, hey, in a market where I have competition, I need to focus on reducing my prices, not on throwing awesome social events. And at the end of the day, there's an accountant and there's some sliders and they decide here's how we spend money. And to me, this seems egregious. So this is one point where there was disagreement, but because the budgets are not broken out in detail, I had no way of actually going back and really correlating this aside from much broader line items. And you're all welcome. These all came from the publicly available budgets where they cover it in pretty broad brush terms. But from what I was able to find, we'll talk about, these budgets are somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million. If we think about links, that's 62 ports or 7.3% of applicable revenue. AM6, that's 76 ports or 8.3% of applicable revenue. That's real money, and I would much rather have an 8.3% discount than have, coffee. And so if we think about that, who had an espresso this morning? Pretty tasty, right? I was proud as Netflix to sponsor that, and I will happily do that again if we can't find sponsors to continue doing that. But at the end of the day, I would much rather AM6 have held on to that 3% of revenue and given me a discount of 3% on my ports, right? So that was 27 10-gig ports that just, of revenue that just got drank away and will get peed out in the bathroom later. So I look at an IXP as a utility. It's a necessary utility. I want IXPs. I think IXPs are awesome. However, utilities who don't have competition, usually due to regulation, depending on who the utility is, you don't see a lot of competition in the power space. You don't see a lot of competition in the telecom space. But they don't spend a lot of money on sales and marketing. You'll see from time to time outreach programs and things like that, but you don't see, PG&E or whoever the electric company is here out paying for coffee bars, right? That's not what they do with their money. Although the for-profit ones certainly can. And again, they make that decision. But if you're regulated with a rate card, you have the choice of, hey, I'm going to get X amount of dollars in this year. I can only spend it, however I can, but I can't run a loss, right? I can only decide that I want to apply the money that I'm taking in to whatever marketing programs I have, or to whatever development programs I have, or to salary, or whatever that might be. But that's it. You're fixed. The competition in the IXP space has been created by the IXPs themselves. In some cases, it's been great. It's worked out quite well. In many other cases, it's been a flop. And depending on how you define a flop, in some cases you're talking about it's flopped in 1 year, or sometimes if you look at IXPs around for 3 or 5 years, that a lonely switch in a closet does not make an IXP with 3 or 4 members that you would consider to be a flop. Members, though, have invested in those, but they don't get the choice as to whether or not to continue paying for them. In my opinion, just like a co-op, members should have visibility into the return on investment on those sorts of activities. So, like I said earlier, why can't they all be like the 6? Please be like the 6. I don't see the 6 out sponsoring lots of things. I've seen them put their name on in-kind sponsorships for things, and that's great, and I love seeing that, and I love seeing the community support itself. 220 members, that's huge. No recurring fees, no coffee bars. Otherwise, we're left with this, which is that we've got, this menagerie of logos for each of these potential IXPs, or each of these operational IXPs, I should say. And, whether they've been successful or not, the members haven't had a choice as to whether or not it's their money that goes to fund these projects, or that money gets put back in their pockets. And if we were really in a co-op model, then that money would have gone directly back into the members' pockets, because while co-ops do not forbid geographic expansion, they certainly don't encourage it. So, is there an expectation of domestic member of an IXP that their membership IXPs are used to further international expansion? I.e., do I, as a member of Lynx, really want my money going towards Lynx Nova as to underwrite that project, which could eventually develop into something, sure, from a profitability perspective, or do I want that money back in my pocket? I'll give you my answer, which is I want that money back in my pocket. I'm sure there are people in this room who disagree. Should that money then just be returned back to the members, right? Who's held accountable if you do pull the plug on an IXP, right? That money is my money, is your money, and yet it's gone. Why is there no accountability from a membership perspective? There are markets that IXPs do subsidized cross-connects. This is done in London, I think it's done in Amsterdam. There's places in the US where this is done. Is an IXP just encouraging people to get people off of the fabric, and really is that where they should be focusing their efforts, or should they be focusing their efforts on making the fabric more affordable? There are IXPs that do lobbying. There are companies like Google who will spend billions of dollars on lobbying. Can an IXP really make a difference, or is that money better spent on outreach much more so than lobbying? So, I would say that, sorry, I think we skipped a slide. No, we didn't, sorry. So, my conclusions on this. IXPs have not followed industry trends for consolidation. Would it be crazy to think that maybe we only need a couple of major IXP operators, 2, 3, 4 of them, or do we really need 40 or 50 of them? We need to see cost innovation in the IXP infrastructure space. We are asking for a layer 2 switching fabric. Deliver us a layer 2 switching fabric, not lots and lots of bells and whistles. There's an open question as to whether or not members should have more say into how money how their money is spent. Should IXPs be co-ops? That was a controversial point that I asked at GPF. Some people agreed with it, some people didn't. Also, IXPs are hugely valuable. Peering is hugely valuable. And the IXP to P&I cycle will continue to churn until we answer any and all of these questions. And with that, I will open the floor to questions. I will call on you because there are already a lot of people lining up. But all I ask is that they're respectful, and that if I cut you off from a time perspective, you are okay with that. Tim.
Hi, Tim Pozar, co-founder of SF Mix in San Francisco. We have 5 locations around the Bay Area. A couple data points. You said no IXPs are 501c12s. We are, in fact, we actually applied for a 6 and got rejected by the IRS and
Really?
said, you really need to be here. And in fact, looking at it, yes, you're right. C12 is actually much more accurate for what we're doing and probably what everybody else is doing. C12 is probably miscategorized for what people are trying to do in this case. Wanted to just sort of a little quick disclosure, the amount of money that we've been spending on marketing, $500 for a barbecue that we had a couple weeks ago, and we did spend $450 for mugs for our 10th anniversary. So $1,000 over 10 years.
Sounds pretty good to me.
And thank you. And I have to say, you know, we wouldn't be able to pull this off if we couldn't get some donations from folks like Telex and DRT and things like that for space and power and cross connects and such too. So that's how we pull it off.
Awesome. Thanks. Matt.
Matt Petak, Yahoo. So IXPs provide an overall benefit to the community. I don't think anybody here is disagreeing on that, with that. What I am curious about, though, is you're talking about millions of dollars of marketing money being spent. If the IXPs are providing a useful function, we're going to show up at IXPs because it's useful, not because there's marketing dollars spent. So kind of a general question out to the community of IXPs is, why do you feel there's a need to spend marketing dollars? We're already going to show up if it's useful, just make it useful and we'll come. Putting out fancy mugs, t-shirts, putting up gala dances and dinners and things like that isn't the reason we're going to show up at an IXP. So is anybody actually going back and asking the IXPs, these marketing dollars you're spending, is it having any delta at all on the number of people showing up? If not, why on earth are you doing it?
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you for summing up my presentation in 45 seconds.
I can actually answer.
Hold on, but you weren't next.
I can answer the question.
Okay.
So, Patrick Gilmore, board member of Lynx, who gave you, I think, the most information of all the IXPs here, and you banged on them the most, which I find a little disturbing. But the answer is yes, we actually measure how many members we get when we go to somewhere like NANOG or PLNOG. And if it didn't pay for itself, we wouldn't be doing it. And those people are not showing up to Lynx because it's useful. They're showing up because we went there and said, oh, by the way, did you know that in London you can get this many peers? And they went, oh, really? So the answer is yes, it is useful. Maybe the coffee bar at NANOG is not the greatest place. Nothing personal, Job, because everybody here knows who M6 is. But there are plenty of places where it actually does have an ROI. That was just my answer to the question. I'll wait to ask my own question.
I would say, Patrick, I completely agree with you, and that to me falls under the side of outreach, right? Which is that I'm going and I'm helping a developing market who will benefit from my services. You hit the nail right on the head, which is that NetNode thing is not needed. The coffee bar is not needed. Do I want a representative or two from Lynx to show up at NANOG and say, hey, if you want to be a well-connected network, here's how you do it? Absolutely. So let's go over here.
Hi, Ryan Rodden, Conversant. I was wondering, in the marketing section of the points you were making, you mentioned utilities being regulated and potentially reducing their need for marketing. Is your opinion that potentially regulating IXPs or peering would reduce the amount of unnecessary marketing?
That is the most catch-22 question I think anyone could have asked me up on this stage today. Fergus.
Hi, Fergus Mackay, Flexop. Fergus Mackay, Flex Optics. Small comment about NetNod. They don't just do IXP, they do DNS services. So their sponsorship is not necessarily just on the IXP side. Okay.
Now, Patrick, question? Or shorter speech disguised as question?
I'll try to keep it shorter.
Thank you.
Patrick Gilmore, I work for Markley Group, but I happen to be on the board of Six and the board of Lynx, just for full disclosure. I also run the Boston IX. So you've made a good presentation. You did well at GPF, and your point is well taken. There could be ways to lower the money, to lower the price. My issue with your thing, taking my short speech disguised as a question, is not your point, but how you presented it. Unfortunately, you do things like, look at this, they're gigantic dancers, can NetNod really have paid for this? Well, NetNod makes a lot of money on their DNS, and you paid to go to that dinner and it was never mentioned. You say things like, membership votes, but it's not binding. I challenge you to find a single issue that Lynx has done without a membership vote behind it. You don't like that we went to Lynx Nova and you voted against it, but the majority of members voted for it. Same with Lynx Scotland, same with Lynx Wales, et cetera, et cetera. You say things like, why are you lobbying? Every year, Lynx asks its members, and over 90-something% of them say, yes, we like the lobbying effort, that's where we want our money to go. So sure, these things could be returned to the pockets of the members, except that's exactly not what the members said. So I'm glad that you want it returned to your pocket, but as a membership organization, when the 90-something% say, I would like you to do X, I feel perfectly, completely comfortable doing that and standing up in front of all of my peers and saying, that's fine. So I'm wondering why you're banging on Lynx
Sure.
and other people so much.
I think your point is taken. Your point is absolutely taken. And just, again, you whitewashed the fact on membership again, which is that the vote is not binding. Whether or not there's an issue, the vote is not binding. So it is what it is. Let me finish, please. Patrick, I was very respectful of you. I'd like to just make the point, my point. You make great points, but Christian Koch, who is not here yet, who I actually would have liked to have made his point again that he made at GPF, made an excellent point, which is that when we think about the people who go out and write checks for how to operate networks, they are generally not the same people, at least in larger networks, who are the ones who make excellent technical decisions about how to build those networks. A lot of the time, those two functions are separated, but unfortunately, in the way that most of these membership IXPs function, the technical people are the one making the votes. They're not the ones looking at the dollars and cents or pounds and, of how that happens. And they may not be the best people well equipped to do that. And you also don't get, based on scale, an equivalent vote. So if I've got 50 ports and it's going to cost me 50 times as much than a 1 gig member, that 1 gig member still has the same number of votes as I do. So you and I can take this offline. Happy to do that for sure. As you know, Matt, looks like you want to ask a question.
Go ahead.
Matt Petak from Yahoo. And actually, I am just going to blatantly do what your slide talks about. And I'm going to turn around to the room here, and I'm actually going to pitch this out to everybody else out here. I love the 6. Many, many years ago, in a different job role, I helped donate some hardware to get the 6 up and going. It's a model I absolutely love. Rather than necessarily say we need to champion fixing the existing IXPs, I will say, if there are locations and places out there where entities want to create 6-like peering fabrics, I will show up at them. I will support them. These are a wonderful, wonderful thing. We don't necessarily need to say, existing IXPs, fix your broken models. We can take the 6 and say, you know what? That's a model we like. Let's do more of it everywhere.
Absolutely. Completely agree. And I think we've seen that. We've seen more and more of that in various other markets. I would argue, I would hope that people in the room are not going to fixate on the specific numbers and more on the meta point. The NetNode thing is a great example. Look, I could have picked any number. You know, I'm Facebook friends with a lot of people in this room. I could have picked any number of different things, any number of dinners, any number of whatever. At the end of the day, sure, we all understand how the sponsorship model works. It's not whether or not someone is sponsoring. We want to see that. And it's not about whether they paid $25,000, $50,000, or $5. The question is, should they? Is it marketing? And when do you cross from outreach into marketing? With that, I will open it up to any final questions. And then if not, we're going to move on to the next 2 talks.
Vikas from Microsoft Operations. So basically, just a question related to 6. If it is a non-costing model, how does the operations work there?
I mean, I can probably speak to that. If I'm wrong, Patrick can certainly correct me. They collect a one-time fee from their members, so they get a port fee plus the cost of the optic. They do give people the option to give them money, whether it's done as a monthly recurring fee or as a one-time donation or as a yearly donation. It's a very small amount of money. They have a contract with a company that effectively operates the IX for them for, I think, $25,000 a year. Is that right, Patrick? something like that?
10,000 plus.
Yeah, it's a very small amount of money that is easily covered by that, and then the cost of the hardware is covered through both a mix of donations and those one-time fees.
Okay, thank you.
One more. Are you? Okay, yeah, we're done. Okay. John, are you asking a question or are you? No? Yes? Okay.
John Suter from Links. I don't want to come over as all defensive, but could you put slide 12 up?
I don't know, which one is slide 12? Sorry.
It's the one with the discussing the membership model. So I did feel a little bit defrauded by that slide because you're quite right. There are, shall we say, pseudo-member exchanges where the votes are non-binding and the board's non-binding in the way that you've described. But it is a fact that votes are binding in Links. It's actually part of our M&A. You could have downloaded and read that. And it is a fact that the board is a fully functioning board. It's not an advisory board. It actually has complete control. So using our picture as an illustration in that particular case does seem a
little bit like marketing?
Yeah. A little bit, yeah, I would agree with you.
I mean, it's marketing. We're talking about marketing.
But you take my point about it's incorrect in
right, and this is why I didn't say Links member votes are right. But you got to admit, the question is right. The graphic phrases my question perfectly. That's all.
Well, I would say the graphic absolutely incorrectly phrases your question.
Fair enough. Okay, so I'm told we have to close the mics and move on.
So thank you, Dave. Thank you for all the discussion. We're 5 minutes over time, so thank you, everyone. I'm sure we can continue this in the hallway.